The notification came at 2:47 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, while I was sitting in a conference room pretending to care about quarterly projections. My phone buzzed against the table, a motion alert from the security camera I'd installed in our living room 3 weeks earlier. I excused myself, slipped into the hallway, and opened the app with hands that had already started to shake. What I saw on that tiny screen made me lean against the wall and slide slowly to the floor, right there in the corridor of my office building, in my best gray suit, with people walking past me like I was invisible. I watched for 4 minutes and 32 seconds without blinking. Then I closed the app, sat in silence for a long moment and cried, not from the reason I'd installed that camera, not from the reason I'd feared, but from something so much more complicated and so much more devastating that it would take me weeks to fully understand what I had witnessed. My name is Daniel Mercer, and this is the story of the worst and best discovery of my life. The sickness that changed everything. 14 months before that Tuesday afternoon, my wife Cassandra was diagnosed with stage 2 lupus nephritis, an autoimmune condition where the body's immune system turns on the kidneys like a soldier who's forgotten which side he's fighting for. The diagnosis came after 8 months of mysterious fatigue, swollen joints, rashes that appeared and vanished like storms, and a series of doctor visits where we were handed pamphlets and platitudes and not much else. Cassandra was 34 years old. She coached youth soccer on weekends. She made the best lemon chicken I'd ever tasted in my life. She laughed loudly and without apology, and she had this habit of touching your arm when she talked to you, like she wanted to make sure you knew she was really, truly present. She was the kind of person who remembered your coffee order after one meeting and your mother's birthday after one conversation. The diagnosis didn't break her immediately. Cassandra wasn't built for immediate breaking, but it wore on her slowly, steadily, the way water carves through stone. The medications made her nauseous. The fatigue kept her in bed for stretches of 2 and 3 days. The flare-ups were unpredictable and cruel. One week she'd be almost herself, laughing at the kitchen table, complaining about reality television, making plans. The next week she couldn't lift a pot of water without her hands trembling. I watched my wife become someone who needed help, and I watched her hate needing help with every fiber of her being. I worked full-time as a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm. We had a mortgage, we had bills. We had a life that didn't pause because our bodies decided to wage war on themselves. I couldn't stop working. We had talked about it exhaustively at the kitchen table and in bed at night and in the car on the way to her appointments. We needed the income. We needed the insurance. The math was cruel, but it was real. So Cassandra was alone during the days. And that was the first crack, not in our marriage, but in my sense of myself as a husband. Every morning I kissed her and told her I'd check in at lunch, and every morning I drove away feeling like I was choosing something over her, even though the something I was choosing was the roof over her head. Marcus. My brother-in-law Marcus had always been the kind of person I respected from a comfortable distance. He was Cassandra's younger brother by 4 years, 30 years old, with an easy confidence that I'd spent years trying to figure out if it was earned or performed. He worked as a freelance graphic designer, which meant his schedule was fluid in ways mine never was. He drove a 10-year-old pickup truck. He never seemed to worry about money in any visible way, though I knew from Cassandra that he wasn't exactly flush with it either. He had a dog named Biscuit, an enormous golden retriever who treated every human as a long-lost family member. Marcus and I were cordial. We were friendly, even. At family barbecues, we talked about sports and movies, and occasionally got into long conversations about things like urban development or documentary filmmaking that surprised both of us with their depth. But we weren't close. We existed in the comfortable orbit of people connected by someone they both loved, without necessarily having chosen each other. When Cassandra got sick, Marcus changed. He started coming around more. At first it was occasional, stopping by on a Sunday, bringing food, staying for an hour or two. Cassandra lit up when he visited. That was undeniable. She was more herself around Marcus in a way that both warmed and unsettled me. The easy, unguarded version of herself that I sometimes felt she was protecting me from, as though she didn't want me to see how much she was struggling. After the first 3 months, the visits became regular. Every Tuesday and Thursday while I was at work, Marcus would come by. He'd text me sometimes, "At your place, brought Cass lunch." Or, "Hanging with your wife, she says hi." I appreciated it. I told myself I appreciated it. I texted back thumbs up emojis and went back to my spreadsheets and felt the guilt lift fractionally from my shoulders. But something else was happening underneath that relief. Something I didn't examine closely for a long time, because examining it meant admitting it was there. I was suspicious. The thing I didn't want to name. Here is what I knew about my wife and my marriage. We had been together for 9 years, married for 6. We had weathered the death of her father, the loss of a pregnancy in year 3, 2 career changes, and a period in year 5 where we went to couples counseling because we had stopped knowing how to talk to each other. We had done the work. We had chosen each other, repeatedly and deliberately, in the way that lasting marriages require. Here is what I also knew. Illness changes the architecture of a relationship. It rearranges the rooms. The person who is sick becomes, in some ways, more vulnerable and more separate simultaneously. Cassandra had retreated into herself in ways I couldn't always follow. There were conversations she shut down, needs she wouldn't name, distances she maintained that I couldn't cross no matter how gently I tried. And here was Marcus, easy, present, available, making her laugh in ways I hadn't in months. I am not proud of where my mind went. I want to be clear about that. I am not presenting my suspicion as reasonable or justified. I am presenting it as human, the kind of dark, irrational fear that grows in the absence of certainty and in the presence of helplessness. When you can't fix the thing that's hurting the person you love most, you start looking for other explanations for the distance between you. You start building stories, and the stories are almost never kind to anyone. I didn't say anything to Cassandra. I didn't confront Marcus. I didn't call a friend or a therapist or my brother. I did the worst possible thing. I went online at 11 o'clock on a sleepless night, and I ordered a small, discreet wireless camera, and 3 days later I installed it in our living room behind a stack of books on the shelf, angled toward the couch where Cassandra spent most of her days. I told myself I just wanted to understand what was happening in my house while I was gone. I told myself it was about safety. She was sick. She was alone sometimes. What if something happened? I dressed the surveillance in the language of care, and I did not look too closely at the outfit. The first 2 weeks. The first 2 weeks of footage were, in the language of my suspicion, deeply uneventful. I watched Cassandra alone. I watched her sleep on the couch with a blanket pulled to her chin at 10 in the morning, the television murmuring quietly at low volume. I watched her carry a bowl of cereal from the kitchen and sit with it in her lap, eating slowly, staring out the window at the backyard with an expression I couldn't fully read, not quite sad, not quite peaceful, somewhere in between. I watched her on the phone with her mother, laughing and then crying and then laughing again. I watched her do the gentle stretching exercises her physical therapist had prescribed, slow and deliberate, pausing when something hurt. I watched my wife live her life while I wasn't there, and I felt something I hadn't expected: grief. Not jealousy, not confirmation of suspicion, just a deep, quiet grief for all the ordinary moments of her existence that I was missing. The way she talked to the cat. The particular way she made tea, filling the mug halfway, letting the bag steep for exactly 3 minutes, adding oat milk after. The moments when she sat in silence and seemed to be having an internal conversation I would never be privy to. Marcus appeared on the second Tuesday. He came through the front door with his key. Cassandra had given him a key at some point, which I had known and somehow not registered until I watched it happen on a screen. And Biscuit came in behind him, immediately launching himself at the couch with the total shameless joy of a dog who has never known rejection. Cassandra laughed. Real laughter, the loud, unguarded kind that I hadn't heard from her in what felt like months. She buried her face in Biscuit's fur, and the dog licked her ear and she shrieked and laughed harder. Marcus sat in the armchair across from her. He put a brown paper bag on the coffee table. He said something I couldn't hear. I hadn't installed audio, just video. And she rolled her eyes at him in that sisterly way that meant you're ridiculous and I love you. They talked. They ate. He stayed for about 2 hours, and during those 2 hours, I watched two people who had known each other their entire lives exist in the comfortable, unpretentious way of family. At one point, Marcus pulled out a sketchbook and showed her something, and she pointed at it and said something that made him cover his face with his hand in exasperation. At another point, Cassandra fell asleep mid-conversation and Marcus simply sat there, scrolling through his phone quietly, not leaving, not waking her, just present. I watched that footage twice. Then I went to bed and lay in the dark next to my sleeping wife and felt the complicated shame of a man who had been wrong, not entirely, not in every particular, but wrong enough. I should have deleted the app. I should have taken the camera down. I didn't. The notification. 3 weeks after I installed the camera, on a Tuesday at 2:47 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I was in a conference room. I excused myself. I opened the app. Marcus was sitting on the edge of the coffee table, directly in front of Cassandra, who was upright on the couch with a blanket over her lap. He was leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, and I could see from the camera angle that he was talking seriously, with an intensity in his posture that I hadn't seen before. His hands moved as he spoke. Then he reached into the bag he'd brought and pulled out what looked like a folder or binder of some kind. He opened it and placed it on the couch cushion beside Cassandra. She looked at it. She looked at him. Then she covered her mouth with both hands and her shoulders started to shake. She was crying. I watched Marcus move from the coffee table to the couch beside her. He didn't put his arm around her. He sat close enough that their shoulders were nearly touching, and he held up one of the pages from the folder so she could see it better. He pointed to something on the page. She nodded, wiping at her face with the back of her wrist. They sat like that for a long time. Cassandra crying quietly, Marcus talking, pointing to things in the folder, patient and steady and unwavering. At one point she shook her head. He nodded as though agreeing with her doubt, not dismissing it, and pointed to the folder again. She looked for a long time. Then slowly, the shaking in her shoulders eased. After about 20 minutes, Cassandra did something that made me slide down the wall of the office corridor and sit on the floor. She hugged him. Not the easy, sibling hug of hello and goodbye. A real hug, arms wrapped tight, face pressed against his shoulder, the kind of hug that contains gratitude and exhaustion and something released. Marcus hugged her back and said something into the top of her head. She nodded against his shoulder. Then they separated. Cassandra wiped her eyes. Marcus closed the folder, and they sat together looking at it for another half hour while I sat on the cold floor of my office building, completely unable to move. What I did next, and how it almost destroyed everything. I made a decision that afternoon that I am not proud of. I decided not to ask Cassandra about what I had seen. Not immediately. I wanted more information. I realized, with the specific self-awareness of a man watching his own bad behavior in real time to build a case. Not against Marcus, against myself, against my fears. I wanted to catch them in something definitive before I confronted any of it, because I was, at my core, afraid of being wrong in both directions. For 3 days I carried the footage in my head like a stone. I replayed it constantly, Cassandra's tears, Marcus's folder, the hug, the words I couldn't read from his lips. I invented explanations, discarded them, invented more. I slept poorly. I was distracted at work. I snapped at a colleague over something trivial and apologized without fully meaning it. On the 4th day, a Thursday, I came home early. Not dramatically early, just an hour and a half before my usual time, claiming a headache to my manager, which was not technically a lie. Cassandra was in the kitchen. She was standing at the counter chopping vegetables with an energy she hadn't shown in weeks, actually standing, actually cooking, the radio on low, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked up when I came in and her expression did something complicated, surprise, and then warmth, and then something that flickered through too quickly for me to name. "You're early," she said. "Slow afternoon," I said. I set my bag down. I looked at her. "You're cooking." "I'm chopping," she said. "Don't make it into a whole thing." I helped her. We made dinner together, pasta, simple, the way we used to on weeknights in the first years of our marriage when we had no money and all the time in the world. We ate at the kitchen table with the back door open to the early evening air. We talked about small things. We didn't talk about the folder or Marcus or any of it. Afterward, doing the dishes, I watched her profile in the window's reflection and I thought, ask her. I didn't ask her. The confrontation, when it came, wasn't the one I'd been rehearsing. It was a Saturday morning, 10 days after the footage. Marcus texted me, not Cassandra but me, and asked if I had time to grab coffee. Just us. I stared at the text for a long time. Then I typed back sure and named a coffee shop near our house. He was already there when I arrived, seated at a corner table, biscuit tied up outside the window where we could both see him. 2 coffees on the table. He'd ordered for me black, which was right, and I sat down and wrapped my hands around the cup and waited. "I want to tell you something," Marcus said, without preamble. "And I want to tell you before Cass does, because she was going to tell you this week, and I need you to understand what you're hearing when she does." I nodded. My heart was doing something irregular and unpleasant. "I've been working on something for the last 2 months," he said. "Something I didn't tell you about because I wasn't sure it would come together and because I didn't want to." He paused, reconsidered, started again. "Because I knew that if I told you, you'd try to be involved and Cass needed to decide this herself, without you in the room." I kept my face very still. "I've been in contact with a specialist at the University of Chicago," Marcus said, "a nephrology researcher. She runs a clinical trial for lupus nephritis patients, a targeted immunotherapy treatment that's showing remarkable results in stage 2 and 3 patients. The waitlist is long. The application process is complicated. He exhaled. "I've been building her case file, medical records, documentation, everything her primary rheumatologist needed to submit. I've been coordinating between her doctors, because Cass didn't have the energy to do it, and she didn't want to ask you to take time off work." I sat very still. "The folder you might have seen me bring over," he stopped, looked at me, looked away. "Cass mentioned you've been a little watchful. I don't know if you—" He stopped again. "The folder," I said, because I had to say something. "Was the full application package, all the documentation. I brought it over to show her before we submitted. She hadn't seen all of it together. She didn't know how much there was." He folded his hands around his cup. "She was overwhelmed. She cried because she didn't realize." His voice tightened slightly. "She didn't realize how much work it had taken. She kept saying she didn't deserve it, and I kept telling her to stop being an idiot." The coffee shop was busy around us. Somewhere behind me, 2 teenagers were arguing about a movie. The espresso machine hissed. "She got into the trial," Marcus said. "We found out Wednesday. She starts next month." What breaks and what holds? I want to tell you that I handled the next few minutes with grace and maturity. I want to tell you that I expressed gratitude and relief in appropriate proportions, that I did not cry in a coffee shop, that I did not have to excuse myself to stand in a bathroom and breathe against the cold tile of the wall. I cannot tell you those things. What I can tell you is that when I came back to the table, Marcus was still there. Biscuit was still visible through the window, tongue out, watching pigeons with professional interest, and my coffee was still warm. "Why didn't she tell me?" I asked. It was the most honest question I had, and probably not the one either of us expected. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You'd have to ask her," he said, "but my understanding, and I might be wrong about this, my understanding is that she was afraid, not of you. She knows you. She was afraid of what it would do to you to have hope and then have it taken away." He turned his cup slowly in a circle. "She loves you a lot, man. Sometimes people protect the people they love by keeping the hard things to themselves." "That's not protection," I said. "That's distance." "Yeah," Marcus said. "I know, but I'm not the right person to tell her that. That's a you conversation." I nodded. I looked at him across the table. This person I had spent 3 weeks surveilling, around whom I had built dark and baseless stories, whose actual offense was doing for my wife what I had not known how to do. "I installed a camera," I said. "I don't know why I said it. It came out like a confession pulled from somewhere deep." Marcus went very still. "In the living room, about a month ago, the words were hard. I was afraid of something that I should have just asked about. I should have just talked to Cassandra. I stopped. I saw the two of you on the couch with the folder. I saw her cry. I saw the hug. I met his eyes. I built a whole story around it that had nothing to do with reality." Marcus looked at me for a long time. I couldn't tell what he was thinking. I could tell he wasn't angry, which somehow made it worse. "Did you ever think," he said carefully, "that if you talked to her she might have told you sooner?" "Yes," I said, "every day since I installed it." He nodded slowly. Then he said something I've thought about many times since. "You didn't trust her, but I think the real thing is that you didn't trust yourself. You didn't trust yourself to handle whatever the truth was, so you watched instead of asking." I had no response to that, because it was exactly correct. The conversation that had to happen. I came home that afternoon, and I took the camera down before Cassandra woke up from her nap. I held it in my hand for a moment, small, black, unremarkable, and I thought about all the versions of a marriage I had watched through its lens. The tired version, the lonely version, the woman eating cereal at the window, the woman burying her face in a dog's fur and laughing herself breathless. I put it in the drawer of my nightstand, not thrown away, not hidden, visible to me as a reminder of what fear could make me do. When Cassandra woke up, I was sitting in the armchair in the living room. She came in with her hair soft and her eyes still slow from sleep, pulling her cardigan around herself, and she stopped when she saw my expression. "What happened?" she said. "I had coffee with Marcus," I said. She absorbed that, sat down on the couch, drew her knees up, waited. "He told me," I said, "about the trial, about everything." For a moment her face did what faces do when bracing for impact. Then slowly the bracing eased. She let out a long, slow breath. "I was going to tell you this week," she said. "I know, why didn't you tell me sooner?" She looked at her hands. She had an answer, I could see her marshalling it, the careful, considered response. But then she set it aside and gave me the truthful one instead. "Because watching you hope is the hardest thing I do," she said quietly. "You hope so completely. When I was first diagnosed, I watched you research everything, call doctors, read studies, you couldn't sleep. I could see it destroying you. And if I told you about the trial and I didn't get in, or if I got in and it didn't work," she looked up. Her eyes were wet. "I didn't want to be the person who was responsible for that look on your face. The hope and then she couldn't finish it." "Cassandra," I said. "I know," she said. "I know it wasn't right. I know you had the right to know. Marcus has been telling me the same thing for weeks. I just needed to wait until something was real to give you." I moved to the couch. I sat beside her close, the way Marcus had, our shoulders nearly touching. And then I told her. I told her about the camera, about the fear, about the story I had built and the footage I had watched and the shape of the terrible thing I had believed was happening. I told her all of it, haltingly and without flattery, the way you have to tell the truth when you've done something you can't dress up. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, the room was very quiet. "You thought," she started. I knew it wasn't true, I said. Some part of me always knew, but the fear was louder. She was silent for a long time. I didn't try to fill it. I sat in it with her and I let it have its full weight. I'm angry, she said finally. Her voice was even and clear. I want you to know that. I'm angry that you watched me. I'm angry that you didn't just ask. I'm angry that you were sitting in our house with me every night carrying that question and not giving me the chance to answer it. She paused. And I'm also, she stopped, looked at the window, looked back at me. I understand. I don't want to because I'm angry, but I understand how fear makes people do things that don't look like themselves. I should have talked to you. Yes, you should have. We should have been talking to each other this whole time, Daniel. Not just this, everything, all of it. She pressed her hand flat against the couch cushion between us. I've been keeping you out because I was protecting you and you've been, she laughed softly, a raw and tired sound. You've been doing surveillance. We're both idiots, I said. Yes, she said, we are. We sat together in the last of the afternoon light, in the living room where a camera had watched my wife's quiet life and given me back nothing but the truth, that she was brave and exhausted and loved me more than she knew how to carry, and that I had missed her while standing right beside her. The trial and what came after. Cassandra began the clinical trial the following month. The treatment was aggressive in the early weeks. She was sicker before she was better, as these things sometimes go. But her specialist was attentive, and her rheumatologist coordinated carefully with the research team. By month 3, her kidney function markers had begun to improve in ways her regular treatment hadn't produced. I took 2 weeks off work in those first months, not all at once, strategically, spread around her treatment days and her hardest weeks. My manager was understanding in the way that managers sometimes are when confronted with the actual fragility of the people who work for them. Marcus came on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I came home for lunch on Wednesdays. We built, without officially deciding to, a kind of loose infrastructure of presence around Cassandra, not suffocating, not hovering, but consistent. Available. There. I told Cassandra everything that was happening at work, the mundane and the significant, and she told me what it felt like during the treatments and what she was afraid of and what she was beginning cautiously to hope. We reinstated a practice from the early years of our marriage, half an hour every evening, phones off, just talking, about anything, about nothing, about everything we'd been storing up in the separate rooms of ourselves. Biscuit continued to visit on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and remained resolutely enthusiastic about the whole situation. What Marcus gave us. About 4 months into the trial, I had Marcus over for dinner, just the 3 of us, no occasion. Cassandra made lemon chicken, the real version, standing at the stove for an hour in a way she hadn't been able to for almost a year. Marcus brought wine. I made a salad that everyone agreed was underwhelming but ate without complaint. After dinner, Marcus and I did the dishes while Cassandra sat at the kitchen table and talked at us from behind her wine glass. She was telling a story about something that had happened at her most recent appointment, a mishap involving a blood pressure cuff and a very startled nurse. And she was laughing as she told it, and Marcus was laughing, and I was standing at the sink with wet hands and the specific happiness of a man who has been given back something he didn't fully know he'd lost. At some point, Marcus handed me a dish to dry and said, quietly, so Cassandra didn't hear over her own laughter, "You're doing better." It wasn't a question. I took the dish. "Yeah," I said. "You both are." "Yeah." He handed me another dish. "She was so scared to tell you about the trial," he said. "Not because she didn't trust you, because you matter too much to her. You know that, right?" "I'm starting to," I said. He nodded. That was all. No lecture, no absolution, no verdict. Just the kind of acknowledgement that one person gives another when they've both been through something and come out the other side still standing. The camera. The camera is still in my nightstand drawer. I've thought about throwing it away. There's something appealing about the symbolism, the clean gesture of disposal, the closed chapter. but I've kept it instead, and I think I know why. It reminds me of the thing I'm capable of when I stop talking and start watching, when I let fear build its own architecture in the dark, when I mistake surveillance for understanding and silence for safety. It reminds me that love, even good love, even lasting love, requires the constant, uncomfortable work of turning toward the person beside you and saying the thing you're most afraid to say. Cassandra knows it's there. I told her and she thought about it for a moment and then said, "Keep it. We should both know it's there." I think what she meant was, remember who you were and who you chose to be instead. A year later. 1 year after Cassandra began the clinical trial, her specialist used the word remission. Not cure, lupus doesn't work that way, and we have learned not to ask for words that the disease doesn't offer. But remission, a quieting of the war inside her body, a negotiated peace, hard one and maintained with continued medication and monitoring, and the specific discipline of someone who has learned the precise cost of her own health. Cassandra came back to the kitchen. She came back to the backyard. She came back, gradually and in her own time, to the person she had been, not the same exactly. Because illness changes you in ways that don't fully reverse but recognizable, present, laughing at high volume and without apology. She's going to start volunteering with the youth soccer program in the spring. Not coaching yet, she's careful with herself in ways she wasn't before, but helping, showing up, being the kind of person who remembers your coffee order. Marcus came to the dinner when we celebrated her 6-month remission marker. He brought biscuit and a bottle of champagne that was slightly too expensive and a card that Cassandra read 3 times and then put on the refrigerator with a magnet. I shook his hand at the end of the night and he shook mine, and then we hugged. The way 2 people hug when they've earned each other's respect through the specific difficulty of hard times honestly weathered. "Thank you," I told him, "for being there when I wasn't." "You're there now," he said. That's the thing about love in long relationships. It isn't a single decision or a single moment or a single grand gesture. It's the accumulation of choices made in ordinary moments, the choice to speak instead of suspect, to ask instead of assume, to stay in the room when it's easier to watch from a distance. The hidden camera taught me nothing I couldn't have learned from walking through my own front door, sitting down beside my wife and simply saying, "I'm scared. Are you? Tell me what you need. Let me be here." It took me too long to learn that. But I learned it. And we are both somehow still here, which is the only ending that ever really mattered.